Right then, yeah, thanks everyone. Welcome to Kpler's first refined products supply and demand outlook for 2025. We're going to be covering cross barrel. Like I said, don't worry, I won't be the ones presenting. It'll be the ones who really put all this together. I'll introduce those guys in a minute. For those that don't know me, lucky you, I suppose. My name is Matt Stanley. I sit in Dubai. I head up market engagement and commercials for new products for Kpler. I've been in it 3 years. It's my 25th anniversary in the oil business, and there's cries of retire, Matt, but not yet. But listen, I'm going to hand over to the guys. So we've got Sumit Ritolia. He sits in India. He's our senior oil refining analyst. Does a great job. We're talking about refineries that are disruptors, especially in the Atlantic Basin. Refineries that are running or supposed to be. Aleka and Dangote have got a few problems in a minute, but that's not a spoiler alert. I'll let Sumit cover those. But we're going to start with Esteban and our cross-barrel demand outlook and what balances are looking like. Have a look at our S&D tool, but it's very much an interactive session. I'll be jumping in occasionally. I encourage you to get in your questions whenever you can. There's a Q&A at the end. If there's a particular subject you want covered in a bit more depth, the guys are really willing to answer those. But ideally, we'll do those when we've got some time at the end. So we've got an hour left, 58 minutes. I will stop talking because I'll let the brains do the talking now. So I'll hand over to Esteban. Over to you, mate.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining. I'm Esteban Moreno, Senior Demand Analyst in Kpler. I believe you all can see my screen, right? Oh, let me share again. Maybe not.
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How about now? It's a presentation update, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, as Matt was saying, we're going to be going over our refined products S&D outlook for 2025, starting out with demand and then later on supply, and just giving you as well some conclusions based on that. Primary drivers behind all of these developments that we expect throughout the year, etc. So it's going to be me, Senior Demand Analyst, and then my colleague Sumit, who is our Senior Oil Refining Analyst. But before jumping into our expectations, I want to take the chance to show you, if you're interested, all these data and forecasts that you're going to be seeing throughout the presentation can be found actually in our terminal. We have granularity, so you can see it on a country by country basis. If these countries have 100 kVd of primary distillation capacity or higher, if not, they're lumped together into a specific sub-region. You can see, you can also put different locations together. You're able to see their balances, actually changes versus our previous updates, and some explanation for that in our inside reports. So make sure to check it out. You can select different products, put products together in here. It's a very user-friendly interface that allows you to play around with the data. And you also have some reports that go along with the specific products and regions that you have selected. Yeah, as I said, different interfaces. You can actually see different seasonal charts as well. Here, this is an example of pad 1. So we do have more granularity in the US, so you're able to see our supply and demand forecasts on a pad basis. And you're able to select balances, demand, etc., and see our forecast and what historical data says. So with that being explained, make sure to contact Kpler if you're interested in any of these features. So let me just jump straight into supply and demand and our vision for 2025. So firstly, let's start on demand. You can see pretty clearly our demand outlook in the left chart of the presentation. This is going to be refined products demand year-on-year growth. As you can see, main trend over here, which has been happening since 2021, is the slowdown in refined products demand growth globally, right? We expect 880 kVd growth year-on-year in 2025. That contrasts with last year, which was 1.4 million barrels per day, if I'm not mistaken, and even the year prior, which was higher than that. These numbers do not account for ethane. With ethane included, our total growth figure for the year will go up to 1 million barrels per day, closely, just a little shy under that. So main trends happening in demand. Of course, same thing, 60% of all the growth is going to be coming from Asia, which is quite expected. This year, since all the post-COVID recovery has nearly been exhausted for transport fuels, you're going to see that the light ends are going to be pretty evened out with gasoline and jet fuel demand growth for 2025. So similar growth values for these other products as well. And then the main highlight for demand, I would say, is going to be China. So we do expect some significant slowdown in Chinese demand growth due to different factors, but primarily it's going to be mounting pressures on its investment-led economic growth, and also some threats to its ballooning trade surplus, particularly with Trump coming into office and planning to implement some tariffs. And you also have some increasing adoption of alternative powertrains, right? You have, regarding gasoline, you have electric vehicles really denting demand or seeing it plateauing, as we'll see further on the presentation, and then LNG trucks affecting diesel. So that would be one of the main highlights, I would say, for the year, slowing demand growth in 2025. So how does that translate into our balances? Well, against this backdrop of slowing demand growth, we're really going to have to turn our attention to supply here. As you can see, we have balances tightening throughout the first half, so relatively tight, especially compared to last year. This is going to be core refined products balances, and it's the chart on the right. And this is mostly going to be a supply side matter. So what we have is closures happening throughout H1. Lyondell Base Refinery in Houston is actually announcing it's starting its closure process, its shutdown process earlier than we actually had anticipated. You have Gunvor mothballing processing units at the Rotterdam refinery in Europe. You have Grangemouth as well in Europe. You have Wesseling. All these refinery closures and shutdowns are happening, or just conversions are happening throughout H1. And all the added refining capacity that we have expected for the year to either be commissioned or experience a significant ramp up in operations are happening throughout H2, so second half of 2025 or early 2026. And then my colleague Sumit will go deeper into it, but you have India, you have Indonesia, you have a couple of countries here to really turn your attention to. But long story short, tight first half of the year to give way to see balances for core refined products to start lengthening throughout H2 as new capacity really starts impacting supply and balances globally. So I'm just going to give a quick run through the barrel and our demand expectations before going to supply and going deeper into that. So firstly, at the top of the barrel, this is going to be focused on LPG and naphtha. As you can see on the top left chart, this is going to be our LPG demand year-on-year growth expectations. So 230, 240 KBD of growth year-on-year. Main point to talk about here would be, of course, Asia is going to be significant driver still. You have India and Southeast Asia demand for cleaner cooking fuels continuing to rise, which is going to trigger higher LPG demand. You also have a planned PDH plant coming online in 2025 in India. But then the main story around Asia, which is also going to apply to naphtha, is going to be China. So China had several PDH plants planned to be commissioned in 2025, so this year. However, only 2 of them will actually come online under our books, with many others being cancelled, postponed, or delayed This is being a factor. Definitely margins for steam cracking and just petrochemical margins, petrochemicals production margins are really going to play and have an impact on these decisions. You can see our Northeast Asian steam cracking margins over in the right chart. As you can see, they have been pretty weak, and we don't expect them to recover significantly or sustainably throughout 2025. I mean, it's not like we do see a meaningful recovery in plastics consumption, and with the Chinese trade surplus being threatened and its manufacturing and petrochemical consumption threatened as well as a consequence, we don't expect this recovery to materialize and see margins improve so that all this new capacity planned to become online in China will be actually happening. So if we take a look at NAFTA, for example, we have 7 million tons of ethylene production per year. Of cracker capacity, sorry, to be built in China. I mean, that translates into 540 KBD of NAFTA demand upside. We don't expect all that to be materialized, right? It's going to be 1/3 of it or 1/4 to be materialized over the period. And that also applies to when taking a look on a regional basis. What you have to consider is that if all this capacity were to come online while having weak steam cracking margins, many of these crackers will have to reduce rate, which we believe it to be the case, and actually experience some rationalization pressures. We take a look at OECD Asia, for example, Taiwan and South Korea, now unable to access all these discounted Russian barrels due to the new sanctions being placed, means that their margins are going to be further hurt or pressured, which means it's going to have to be translating into run cuts, rationalization pressures, especially if we see more capacity in China being put online and ramping up operations. Apart from that, a couple of touches in Europe, which is the other main petrochemical hub. You have growth in the LPG side stemming primarily from Borealis' new PDH plant in Antwerp, expected to come online in May. And then on the naphtha side, petrochemical margins are not very good. We don't expect them to recover or increase meaningfully as well. You can see that reflected in Italy closing its last 2 steam crackers throughout this year, and PKN Orlen actually delaying its olefins petrochemical project until 2030. So not a very good outlook over in the naphtha front for Europe as well. Now, moving on to gasoline. Main stories here, I mean, you have to take a look at China first, which you can see over in our right chart. We do expect demand to hit a peak in 2027. Main factors behind it is going to be the penetration of electric vehicles, story everyone has heard over and over again over the past months or year. Apart from that, you have an interesting factor as well playing its part in our demand expectations. It's going to be the US. We have seen indications of traffic volumes stagnating, which coupled with penetration over there as well of electric vehicles, hybrids, and more efficient internal combustion engine vehicles, will see its demand pressured throughout 2025 to either be flat year on year, or actually in our books, we have it at a slight decrease. So that leaves really Southeast Asia to do all of the legwork to see gasoline demand growing throughout the year, as well as Europe, which we have seen both gasoline and hybrids dominating new car registration throughout 2024. And we expect that to continue as its diesel cars continue to be substituted throughout the year. Now, moving on now to the middle distillates. What we have here is just continuing on Europe. All these diesel car substitutions are going to continue to weigh on diesel demand, which has been decreasing over the past years, as you can see over in the left chart of that regional split. However, in Europe as well as in the US, what we have seen as well is some early signs of an improvement in their industrial sectors. So Europe is going to be benefited by lower interest rates, which will help their industry. We don't expect the effects to really materialize until the second half of the year. But that you also have to add the additions that will come from marine gas oil demand after the implementation of the new Med-ECA rules, which is expected to replace some VLSFO to MGO with MGO in the region. That's going to help and provide some upside to diesel demand growth in Europe. And over in the US, again, we've seen some indications both in industrial activity, industrial sector health, as well as freight activity, pointing towards some recovery in its diesel demand in 2025. Now, very quickly on jet, main trends happening would be, well, first, the fact that, as I previously said, you do have most, if not all, of the post-pandemic air traffic recovery to reach pre-pandemic levels have been nearly exhausted. The only place where there's still some gap to fill would be China and neighboring countries. But as we have seen, China's continued to fail to pick up its international flights activity, as you can see over in the right chart. It's going to be those orange bars over there. So with that being materially lost and being really reflected also in exports out of the country being picking up, as you can see over in the black line, we don't expect China to really experience any meaningful recovery or just increases in jet fuel demand heading into 2025. Also, as well, considering all the stimulus packages out of the country have been monetary in nature, so injecting liquidity into the market and lowering rates, nothing really meaningfully being done for the consumer side of things that could imply that jet fuel demand will stay, will not grow significantly for 2025. On top of that, what you have on a global basis is improvement in aircraft efficiency, which will leave out a picture of just 240 to 130 kVD year-on-year growth in our books for jet fuel. Lastly, before we go into supply, I want to talk about the bottom of the barrel a little bit for fuel. What we have is just the main general trends would be fuel demand will continue to fall. You have substitution in both the power generation and industrial sector continue to happen throughout Europe, some of it in Russia, as well as the Middle East. And on top of that, you have the Med-ECA rules, as you can see over in the right chart. We expect that to see some of the VLSFO displays for marine gas oil starting in May 2025. On top of that, in Europe itself, you also have some other regulations which should put a little bit of pressure on fuel demand for bunkering. That's going to be Fuel EU Maritime Regulation 2025 as well, coming into phases. And then another focus point, I would say, and something to look out for will be China. We do see China experiencing some pressure on fuel demand for refinery feedstock, right? You have the increases in the import tariffs from 1% to 3%. You have the sanctions on Russian vessels, seeing dependents having difficulties for sure to get some of the cheap feedstock from Russia and Iran, really denting fuel demand from this side of things. So with all that, I'm just going to give way to Sumit to start our supply outlook and insights and explanations behind them.
Yeah, thank you, Esteban. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I am Sumit Ritolia. I cover refinery side of the things here at Kpler. So in the next few slides, I will be covering mostly about how the refinery supply takes place and how this is impacting the global balance. So again, we are at that point of the year where focus naturally shifts to new capacities, expansion, and how the supply dynamics takes place overall, how much new capacities are there and all. So in this slide, let's start with new capacities additions. So as highlighted here, we have significant refinery expansion both in primary and secondary. You have many hydrocrackers coming up in Russia. You have Bapco Citra refinery upgradation coming expected to enter into pre-commissioning stage. You have Vizag refinery hydrocracker unit getting completion, and in Q3, Q4, you have Indonesia Balikpapan refinery starting up its residue upgradation project in Balikpapan refinery. So overall, these new capacities and ramp ups are expected to drive crude run rates higher, particularly in Nigeria, India, Bahrain, and again, like I will particularly want to talk about those blockers. So overall, we don't see much effect coming up regarding those blockers in 2025 because they post its startup in 2022 and what we have been seeing in 2023, the refinery is still fine-tuning its operation. So we don't see major ramp up happening around those blockers in 2021, 2025. Whatever happens, as of now, we see most of the supply additions or most of the refinery ramping up in for the first train of its Olmeca refinery 170 KBD taking place mostly in Q2 to H2 of this year. So, how does this affect the margin? So this overall new capacity addition translates into oversupply, and this is expected to put pressure on refining margin, mostly towards H2 side of this year. And as Esteban also mentioned that so there is imbalance happening around you closures and net additions. You have more closures in Q1, H1, and you have actual capacities and new capacities ramping up more in Q2. So this will lead to tightening of mostly the gasoline and gas oil with tightness, what we have been seeing in H1, and whereas in H2 you have balances lengthening up. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, next slide, Esteban. Yeah. So, so in this we see like how the crude intake is shaping up with respect to what we see in the crude balances overall. So tepid demand growth and rising refining capacity is expected to put some pressure on the subdued margin as supply additions continue to outpace the total demand recovery. So overall, the product demand is expected to keep a refinery runs in check, particularly in China, though we will be discussing that in the next few slides. So at the same time, if you see the crude balances, we see additional supply coming up mostly from the OPEC plus and non-OPEC producers, with Brazil, Norway, and USA contribute to the prolonged oversupply in the crude balances, keeping the overall crude balance and lengthening and keeping flat prices in check. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so it's very hard not to discuss China when we are discussing overall product and refining and supply. So while balancing China, the major question comes in our mind is like how we are seeing 2025 Chinese runs. Will it extend it downtrend what we have seen in 2024, or will we see a reversal and we see a 2025 with new capacities like Yulong, Zenai Petrochemical coming up and increasing Chinese runs? So overall, as of now, what we see is Chinese refining runs in 2025 keeping flattish year on year or around only 100 KBD growth. This growth is mostly coming from Yulong and Zenai Petrochemical refinery. The 100 KBD that we expect is mostly these new capacities like Yulong and all. This will translate mostly in the petrochemical market because these new refiners are heavy petrochemical intense. These have high petrochemical intensity. So these are not expected to lend in or contribute more towards the transportation fuel market. Whereas we have seen, or like if you can see the bottom right hand chart, like export margins for the Chinese refinery have been faring poorly. So overall, we see that Chinese refining runs being in check, mostly two major factors like demand being in check, which we see that soon the demand is peaking, and whereas with respect to the margins defined by less requirement of Chinese barrels in the region, with more capacities coming around in the region and less availability of cheap feedstocks, like Esteban mentioned in his FO demand, like the increase in taxes has, and whereas increased mm, sanctions on Russia and Iran. So overall, these will keep Chinese refinery runs in check. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so before Jan 20th, like the major talk of the town was like how the new sanctions will impact Chinese runs, mostly towards the refining margins. So refining runs, and also as of now, we see a slight minor impact on Russian crude intake, mostly towards the spring turnaround season, that is from March to June, because we don't see any significant dip in Chinese runs happening in January and February because of the 2 months wind down period they have. So we see mostly more again in the again, like which refineries, like these are simple ones or complex ones. So we see around 10% of the simple refining capacity, that is around 150 to 200, 220 kbd, taking a hit overall in these 3-4 months of the spring, mainly due to shrinking availability of your dirty tanker. So these will lead to high fuel oil inventories, and again forcing them to cut runs. So, and the knock-on effect of this is strengthening gasoline balances, as you can see in our chart, mostly for Russia, and leading to lower gas oil and fuel oil exports from the region. Yeah, next slide. So yeah, we have now the great Dangote side. Dangote refinery in Nigeria, it has been the talk of the town, and what we have seen in last 2 months, like uptick in its operations and crude intake. So I see this is again to be one of the major factors in 2025 whenever we talk about refinery supply and how the trade flow is happening. So mm, uh, like let's break it into two, like before November and what we have seen in post December. So from August to November, like we have seen a slight dip in their crude intake. Their crude intake was roughly around 220, 200, 240 kbd. But like since December, they have picked up with more supply, with more crude supply coming from NNPC. So we have seen, like as Kpler data is estimated, that we have seen December import hovering around 450, and January crude import is also shaping up well. So we see a good ramp up in with respect to crude intake. But whereas if you see, like in terms of its secondary unit operation, like Dangote has been doing very well. Like if you think of a site like 650 kbd, a single train refinery, so they have with if you leave aside polypropylene unit, all the major secondary unit has been commissioned, and like they have been doing operationally well. You have hydrocracker started up last year, reformer, ISO, and RFCC in stabilization mode, and that is also vetted by the startup of their polypropylene unit. So this signifies that they have achieved some sense of stability with respect to their operations in the secondary unit. So that is one of the major factors. Like we see significant improvements in their fuel quality also. Though for the diesel or for the gas oil part, with help of mild hydrocracker unit, they are on the stage of, or even some cargoes we have tracked down that they have been producing low sulfur diesel. But for Euro 6 grade for gasoline, they are just at the door. Like what we have seen, like for them, RON has been like superb, like around 92, 95 RON. They have been producing aromatics also 30, 35, hovering between 30 to 33, 34, olefin well around 18 to 19. So they have, only thing for them to get certification of Euro 6 has been sulfur, and with alkylation unit expected startup and stabilization we see in next few months, or I think before Q2, we might see Euro 6 production from Euro 6 gasoline production from Dangote. And overall, depending on how the crude intake is shaping up, and we see a refinery utilization level to hover to increase mostly towards Q3, Q4, and reaching at around a peak of 60 to 70% as the year ends. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so again, like just recapping, like Dangote's major production is gasoline. Like it is designed for around 40 to 44% of gasoline, and as we see, they have been like from as per our balances, like January and December, January, the yield has been around 30 to 35%, roughly around 100 to 120 kbd of gasoline they have been producing. So they have still room with the same amount of the crude they are processing to increase the gasoline yield to around 8 to 9%. So they have been doing well, slow and steady. They are up to the mark for the gasoline yield percentage. Whereas on the export side, if you see, like Nigeria is becoming a regional power hub. Like post their uh, uh, post their RFCC stabilization, they have been, if you see on the bottom right hand side, like they have been covering mostly African markets. So this signifies that yeah, yes, there is low requirement of European gasoline balance as we have seen, and be it Cameroon, be it Togo, Ghana, and all, they have been getting Nigerian gasoline. So it is shaping up global trade mostly from Europe to WAF, and is expected to continue in that fashion. Yeah, next slide. So before we conclude, like there are several factors that will shape up refinery supply, but the key factors are, as point one, as mentioned, the product imbalance in product balance. You have tightness in H1, whereas you have lengthening of the refined product balances in H2, and that is expected to keep pressure on margin, as you can see on the right hand side. Second point is how the trade flow trade flow trade flow shapes up post Dangote ramps up in. So we have also started seeing, and we will be seeing more in, like European off-spec gasoline has to find some places. This will result in increasing of stocks and all. The third point is again like how the Chinese refining runs will take place, or how fast Yulong second train and its ethylene plants ramps up. So this is and and the fourth point is like how much these the expected capacities that are coming up, how much they fast ramps up, and what will be how will they impact on the total supply, leading to overbalancing, lengthening of the balance in H2. And the last point, not major one, but with yeah, last point is like with respect to Nigeria, like with the tepid demand growth, even new capacities of 50 or 60 kbd will have impact on the overall balances. And with Nigeria, leave aside Dangote, you have Port Harcourt refinery. Already the phase one is at phase one of 60 kbd is running at 50 to 60%, whereas they are working on to start up of 150 kbd second train, or the second phase. You have Wari refinery also on the door. So Nigeria, we see post Dangote, many other refineries in Nigeria, Port Harcourt, and you have Kaduna refinery already taking place for its startup. So Nigeria, look out for Nigeria for more product supply apart from Dangote. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, happy to take questions.
Thanks, Sumit. Wow, there's a lot to digest there. All those great charts you guys put together. All right, look, there's questions coming in. Keep them coming in. For those that want to hear, we'll get some guys involved very shortly. Main takeaways for me. Look, 880,000 barrels a day of demand growth. China obviously being the main contributor. Diesel demand plateauing this year. We wrote something on that in August last year. Actually, we can reshare that one. Gasoline demand plateauing next year. EV penetration. The Americans not buying as much gasoline. Who would have thought it? The Donald won't like that. We'll talk about the Donald more in a minute. But look, just to pick up the demand side, just to start with Esteban. Listen, we've got to put ourselves in a room with the competition. Why wouldn't we? It's like being in the Premier League. We're quite a lot lower than other forecasters, right? I mean, the OPEC have obviously got skin in the game or a barrel in the game, 1.4 million barrels a day of demand growth. Last year was a bit brutal for them because they revised down their forecast from the start of the year for 2024 from what 2.2 to then 1.4 by December, but it didn't start sort of dealing with reality until July. 1.4 for OPEC, 1.1 for other agencies like the IEA and the EIA over in the States. We're 880. Why the difference? I'm sure a lot of people will be thinking that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as you said, I've been seeing as well many other, well, not many other, but other agencies stating demand growth of over 1 million barrels per day. That's for sure. I've seen 1.2, 1.3 million barrels per day. And our outlook comes a little bit bearish for that, like 880 KBD. However, I mean, these to compare them with these other agencies, we'll have to include ethane in there, which will put our number at about 960, 970 KBD growth year in year. Still, it's going to be lower and a bit more bearish, but I think just looking at their outlooks or what they're stating right now, we still stand firm in our assumptions. Here, I think ethane and Iran could be playing a big role. That is probably differentiating us from the rest of other outlooks. With the ongoing energy crisis that have happened since November, right? We've seen them suspending gas supplies to the petchem plants. Likely Trump imposing sanctions probably and some maximum pressure campaign towards Iran. That we believe, and that's something we have made adjusted actually this month. We believe that's significantly going to reduce Iran's ethane demand, which we now show it dropping quite significantly year on year. This just means that ethane demand growth, while many other agencies have it probably higher, we just have it at 80 KBD growth year in year, and that's coming primarily from revamped crackers in China, Europe, and then some a little bit more upside in the Americas, in the US and Mexico. So yeah, I guess that would be one differentiating factor. Again, I do believe they're probably going to have to lower their outlook as the year goes on, but we'll see.
OPEC.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't think they're on the call at the moment, but look, I mean, it pains me. Fuel oil has long been something I've traded and broked, and it pained me to read your report that you see fuel oil demand dropping by 190,000 barrels a day this year. LPG, the top of the barrel, doing much better. Of course, it is nice and clean. But look, the residual part, I mean, look, 0.5 margins last year, VLSFO, a strong part of the barrel, performed really well. We got the Ecozone coming in the Med from the 1st of May. You see that between 250, 400,000 tons a month dropping in demand. I mean, we've had a question in, just how do you see scrubber uptake on vessels affecting high sulfur fuel oil demand in the Med ahead of the Eco coming in? I mean, that's going to be, I mean, the tankers we'll talk about probably with Matt Wright on the, the effects there, Eco, when his next freight webinar would be in February. High sulfur fuel oil demand, what's going to happen in the Med? What's it, 12 million tons a year roughly of demand, something like that. But you're talking about transiting the Med. It's really the biggest swinger next year for fuel oil is the Ecozone coming in the Med. You agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe one of our fuel colleagues wrote a very nice piece about it not so long ago. But basically, what we have seen, or what we do expect, is 70 or 80% of all this VLSFO demand. I mean, pretty much they will have to switch to ULSFO, right? But 60 or 80% of all this VLSFO is expected to be shifted to MGO. And the remaining of the 20% of the displaced VLSFO will potentially convert to ULSFO. However, I mean, the main short, long story, like just giving a very brief answer on it, you have, of course, ULSFO price advantage over MGO, right? Which would suggest maybe a higher uptake. However, there are operational constraints. You have ships, limited tank segregation capacity on board, challenges in fuel, commingling, vessels operating strictly within the Med. They're going to be anticipated to account for the majority of this increased ULSFO demand, while those vessels that are in and out of the Med will likely drive this incremental MGO sales. That's why that's 70 or 80% that we were talking about. So that's kind of our take on the whole Med-ECA zone.
Yeah, look, I think there's loads to pick out there, and it's probably a whole nother session because are we going to see the Suez traffic increase with the ceasefire and the Houthis saying they're going to pull back? Is that bearish freight? What happens in bunker ports in the Med? It's there's a load to pick out there for sure. I mean, I think Fujairah has got a lot to do with it as well. What if one of the refineries in Fujairah apparently is down and looks like we're down permanently? What does that do for balances in the AG? Lots to talk about there. But the big one that I want to ask, because there can't be an oil forum or anything that's going on without talking about the Donald and what his planned tariffs are going to do. He's obviously announced Mexico and Canada, which he's done first. And then there's rumors about 10% tariff coming in Feb 1st on China. I mean, have you factored Trump's planned tariffs into your demand expectations for next year?
Yeah, so I mean, Trump is another highlight which we haven't really talked a lot throughout the presentation, but definitely with these tariffs, there are clearly going to be, whatever the extent it's going to be, there are going to be some winners and losers from them. That's going to be the main message, right? And for that, you kind of have to take a look at the trade deficit and the main partners in there. If we have a base case, but if we are to assume that, for example, China is to get significantly higher tariffs or a significantly high scenario in there, then, as I said, it's going to be the big loser over there. Our demand expectations will be reduced out of China, particularly diesel, naphtha as well. But then in turn, you do have some upside in other of the partners, since, these sort of specialized industries are only going to be found, or mostly going to be found, in Europe. That's going to be the place to look at in terms of demand upside, since they're going to have to cover at least some of the gap that will happen if this high tariff scenario towards China materializes. So again, it's going to be a matter of just playing with the different scenarios. But as for our base cases, they're all inputted in our demand expectations right now.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think that's the right answer, right? Because in what has been a fairly benign start to his administration, and really when he got elected, it's been even his acceptance speech was quite humble, apart from obviously the rhetoric about drill baby drill and immigration policy. Obviously, his first day in office was aggressive, to say the least, in terms of the amount of executive orders that he signed. But I think it's still too early to sort of assign what one view, right? I think there's got to be many that we sort of put against, and I think the first 100 days of administration will be really important for that. Look, Esteban, thanks, and everyone, keep on bringing in your questions. We're sort of we can still trying to go through as many as we can while we've got a few more minutes. We'll also share the slide deck, anyone who wants that, and then we can get in more into the weeds of stuff about a particular product at a later time. Just reach out to your friendly neighborhood Keplerian. But Mr. Ritolia, let's talk about supply for a minute, shall we? And look, the big one. I mean, me and you and I, excuse me, we were on a webinar last year, I think June, when we were talking, or July maybe, we were talking about Dangote. Was it? Yeah, seems a distant time away. And is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Dangote, what does it mean for Atlantic Basin crudes, balances, naphtha cracks, blah, blah, blah. Very much still there though. And he's, very much surprised to the upside. I think, there was obviously an article earlier on in the week that he'd had to increase his prices because flat price roofed after the sanctions were announced on Russia, etc., etc. But we've had a few questions on that. But I mean, just going back to it, just from our point of view now, I mean, what's your outlook on Nigerian crude intake and supply balances going forward based on that great chart? I don't know if we can pull that back up on the timeline of the Dangote refinery where we were. We sort of saw it. We've got the polypropylene plants coming up now. We understand that the RFCC is down. It should be down for a week. There was a maintenance issue. We heard that this morning. That news has been confirmed. I know someone was asking that as well. We are a news agency as well, not just a webinar. But yeah, that's down as well. The polypropylene plants were supposed to start. But look, how much of it you've sort of factored in and what happens with supply balances going forward based on Nigeria's crude intake?
Okay, so if you see like from December, their crude intake was around 450, and like January's overall crude intake is shaping up well. But but on the product export side, like it has not really picked up, like, or it has decreased month on month. So with respect to let's talk about break it to Q1. So Q1 we are seeing Nigerian runs around 350, 360 KBD as of now, by not going slowly behind like whatever how much the crude intake is, like that is totally corresponds to their crude runs. So and you have PP unit, like for me the one of the major factor for ramp up is like commissioning of the PP plant, because again, like as I talked before, like this signifies that they have attained a good level of satisfactory operation with respect to RFCC. And other news was like they have started importing like uh, a mild to heavy grade of crude like pass flow. So they will be getting Angolan grade this month. So this signifies that yeah, they are trying to move away from low sulfur light grades from NNPC and starting up with starting the units and start putting up like heavy grades into the system for, again, like this will other transfer into more utilization of RFCC. Coming back to your question on utilization, we see Q2 to Q3 moving at around like 350, 370, 380, 390 KBD, whereas in Q4 moving at around 450, 480, hovering around that region. But again, this is solely based on like before, like the SND what we have released on 3rd January, like, and we were for with respect to crude runs, we were a tip lower, but whatever we have seen from last few weeks, like they have barrels coming in from NNPC. So this has forced us to uptake around 40 to 50 KBD of Nigerian runs overall.
Okay, yeah, look, I mean, I know we just spoke about the fact that 6 months ago we were on the Dangote, but I do think it's still probably the biggest disruptor in the market for 2025. Do you? I mean, Port Harcourt we know is up. They've just exported a fuel oil cargo. There was a tender for a fuel oil export from Warri, which must be a worry for Dangote. Sorry, intentional pun, bad joke. Sorry about that. Do you think that Dangote factored in that there would be additional refining capacity that would come up in Nigeria so quickly, or is it a bit of a, because there was an article last week that I read where Port Harcourt and Warri refineries they're going to prioritize those. NNPC will prioritize those for crude intake, and then Dangote is number 3. Is that a sort of spanner in the works for Dangote?
I think it was like the NNPC. To be honest, like it was like how NNPC saw like Dangote ramping up fast. So even like we were surprised with Port Harcourt. Like it was in the plan of starting from last one and a half year. Like and at the moment you have Port Harcourt starting up, Warri Refinery starting up. So I think it's an after effect of how Dangote has been doing good. So I don't think, like, to be honest, Dangote might have captured like with so new old refineries of Nigerians starting up at sort of such quick space.
Yeah, fair. Look, I think it's one that's changing weekly, and obviously, the news this morning, RFCC down. Does that, do people start pulling in barrels from Northwest Europe? Is there enough locally? Is there stuff in tank? Is there rumors of tank tops? loads to pick out there. Look, let's move away from Nigeria a sec. I just want to concentrate one more thing on Russia. We've had a good question in. What's the rationale for you assuming Russian run cuts, lack of tonnage? Only crude vessels have been sanctioned, so eventually it would mean more runs. What's the house view there on Russian run cuts?
Okay, so house view is that mostly the run cuts is expected to be in the simple refineries, and that is around 10 to 15%. So overall, Russian simple refinery capacity corresponds to around 2.5 to 2.6 million barrels per day. This is on back of lower availability of fuel oil cargoes, so the fuel oil ton is moving to the crude space. So that is the one of the deciding factor. Again, we are confident that it will not have much severe impact, but we see a minor impact mostly in the spring turnaround season, like March to June, July, as Russian traders and producers tries to move out of the sanctions and finds new places.
Okay, interesting. I mean, look, if only there was a tool where you could anticipate planned or unplanned maintenance on refineries. Oh, there is. It's our refineries tool. That was a shameless plug. I'm not sorry. I'm sorry. Look, a couple more minutes. We're going to go. If anyone's got any more questions, get them in. But listen, Esteban, we started with you. Let's end with you. And it's the elephant in the room. It's his Donald once again. Good questions come in. Gasoline demand down in the States. Drill, baby, drill. Burn more oil. Don't care about Johnny Polar Bear as much as the Biden administration did. What's your view on the impact of Trump's measures on gasoline and EV mandates? You know, if they come to an end, people back to the office, gasoline demand goes up because rush hour is busier. We've got 50,000 barrels a day decrease. Has the Donald got that much of a swing, you think, on gasoline demand in the States?
Yeah, so again, for this particular case, I would say on Donald Trump, as well as like our gasoline demand expectations, we're taking a cautious stance as things stand right now. If we start seeing things developing in terms of EVs, etc., where things start really shaping up and gasoline demand as well, we'll make the necessary adjustments. But so far, you have clear trends that cannot be, or at least that does not have the leeway to be changed that dramatically, okay, that drastically. That one would be something we have seen since mid-2023, which is traffic overall stagnating. That's a trend that it's happening currently as we speak. And then as for the VE situation, we have seen sales across the EV spectrum, so including hybrid electric vehicles as well, overpassing 20% for total sales on the car passenger vehicle fleet. So that's already important, significant figures, nothing to be to not take a look at, or at least consider in terms of what's the current passenger car fleet composition of, and what that's going to what impact that's going to have in our demand expectations for gasoline in the US. So overall, if you want to have like a clear answer or message from that, it would be we're taking across the board with the Trump administration a cautionary stance. So we're being very cautious in terms of what potential impact it will have, both on demand, supply, and all across the board. But we'll see how things develop and if we need to make any drastic changes to them.
Okay. All right. Thanks, mate. Look, I mean, you heard it here first. Look, it's not the year of the Donald, it's the year of caution. Look, thanks, guys. It's been great. I'm pretty sure we'll have to do one of these once a quarter and reflect back on how we looked and what we got right, what we need to address. But it's certainly less positive. I'm not going to say bearish, but look, the world is still buying a lot of oil, so we're all relevant still. No one has to go home and look for new jobs. Listen, Esteban, thank you. Sumit, thank you. We'll share the slide decks. We're here and ready when you've got any questions. But thanks to everyone for joining. Don't be afraid to reach out. It's not that bad a year, don't worry. It's just a year of caution. All right. We'll see you all again soon. Thanks for joining.